Hey, Greg, good to see you again.
Hey, Chris, nice to catch up after this long COVID physical separation.
Yeah, I hope you're settled in over there at Intel. It was great to work with you at VMware, and now we're in this different setting. So let's go ahead and get into it. As I think back over the last few years, particularly some of the time when I was director at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the U.S., every year seemed to have some theme, and every year was certainly a little bit different in terms of the security challenges and the events that we faced. But between the time I spent in the agency and the time I've since been outside back in the private sector, 2 years in particularly really stand out to me. 2017 with NotPetya and WannaCry and Bad Rabbit and a host of other events. And then 2021, really starting off the year with a bang and addressing some of the SolarWinds issues, and then getting right into Exchange, Hafnium. You think about the notable ransomware events between Colonial Pipeline and JBS, and then unfortunately closing out the year with Log4j. So, there's a big diversity in terms of root cause between those 2 years and the major events they have. But you have a pretty significant R&D team at Intel, and as the chief technology officer, you're responsible for innovation. And so as you think about whether it's those 2 years or just the security issues that we have to deal with broadly, what are the most important trends in security and some of the breakthroughs that you're trying to drive at Intel?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and we all see the headlines, but there's other sort of nefarious things going on that don't make the headlines. And so, when I came in, I've been here about a little over 7 months at Intel, and as I came in, I realized, okay, Intel's got a fundamental role to play in the foundation of securing what I'll call trusted computing platforms. And this has been talked about in industry at least for 20 years. And I was like, okay, as the new CTO of Intel, how do I sort of pull together all the resources, all the capabilities across this big company to basically really make a hard run at this problem, particularly at the foundational sort of, say, the chip level and the operating system level, the BIOS level, et cetera. It turns out Intel was already doing a lot in securing the firmware, securing the BIOS. We have a bounty program that we run to get white hats to attack our systems and identify any vulnerabilities we have. And we have an attestation service. So every server we ship, through whatever partners and vendors, they can attest to the correctness of the software, the BIOS, the firmware, et cetera. So I think we had a strong foundation, but we didn't really sort of have it all pulled together. So I created a security COE and pulled all the constituent parts together, the hardware, the firmware, the software, and we really look at it as, how do we provide a more trusted computing platform? And the whole industry needs to line behind this. So, but that's just the foundational layer. If you then go up to the next layer, you have literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of open source software ecosystems, libraries, et cetera. And that becomes an attack surface, as we've seen with recent events like Log4j, where everyone's adopting this open source. And if one vulnerability gets exploited, then it has wide blast radius of problems. So I'm actually a member of this recently formed Open Source Security Foundation under the Linux Foundation. And the CTOs and the leaders of many, many companies are actually now there. And this is the number one priority for that organization, is how do we address the vulnerabilities of the supply chain aspects of open source? Open source, there's a lot of great creativity and innovation there. But if we also don't bring the security there, then we're all at risk, and that provides a vulnerability. So you'll see more from the Open Source Security Foundation as we go forward into this year, because this is the number one focus.
Yeah, there are a couple words that you use throughout that really stand out to me. And as you know, I spent time at Microsoft before coming back into the government, and I think back to the Bill Gates Trustworthy Computing Memo from 2003. And so this concept of trust, where trust is effectively the coin of the realm in the IT industry. And if you think back to the Super Bowl the other day with the Coinbase ad with the QR code dancing across the screen, and it really generated an interesting brouhaha in the InfoSec community. But it really came down to me that if someone can't click on a QR code on a TV after the advertisement was about $16 million worth of investment, then fundamentally we've done something wrong. So I think it gets back to your point of how do we work higher up the stack in the technology stack to make sure that downstream it's more secure by design and deployment, and everybody can benefit from that. And I think that's particularly important because, again, pointing back to a few of the events over the last couple years where the adversary has targeted supply chain, and they're working further down the supply chain, as I see it, into that kind of middle market space. Some of those increasingly systemically important companies that provide software solutions and services, but they don't have the massive security budgets of the Microsofts and the Intels and some of the others. And so I think it's a not just a good thing, it's a great thing when we provide a more trustworthy foundation. So I want to go back to the open source piece that you just talked about. So that was unfortunately one of those things that you kind of expect every year. Something always happens right around the holidays, whether intentional or not, but it tends to ruin a bunch of leave and holiday for folks. And we saw incident response teams and technology teams trying to get their arms around where within their organizations they were using this open source technology. And so, putting aside for the moment the concept of a software bill of materials that may help people rapidly respond to events like this, I noted that in the US, the Department of Homeland Security recently stood up their Cyber Safety Review Board, and they're going to take, among other things down the road at least, they're going to take a look at Log4j. They convened a group of key open source or key technology executives to how to address the broader challenges of open source software. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing on the board of the Open Source Software Security Foundation, that OpenSSF that you mentioned? What do we think we can do here, and how can we incentivize more secure outcomes more broadly?
Yeah, well, let me just maybe give you a little sample from my own background. I worked in financial services for 6 years, and I had CTO level role, broad responsibilities, and of course, cybersecurity engineering was a key function in my organization. And of course, the CISO set policy, and the SOC, ran the day-to-day, firefight with all the adversaries. But it was always like, I think I had over 150 security products deployed throughout the environment. And when I would give the board an update, they would sort of say, well, can you give me a guarantee that we won't be hit? And I says, well, no, I can only give you a guarantee that we're as good as we think we can be until the next event. And we always assumed that we would be hit, and we would have, it's all about, the cyber kill chain and how do you recover from the event, right? So you can't just keep building the wall higher and higher. And this is the dilemma. And so we used a lot of open source. And so I did what many, large organizations who can afford to do is I had my own internal repos of all the open source technologies that were authorized for use across, the firm globally. And ran technology like Black Duck and SonarQube and all these sort of scanning tools, even to make sure that what I had in that repo, and I blocked all access to external open source access by any developers in the firm. And so that way I sort of had a reasonably good guarantee, but we still got bit by OpenSSL. So we had the OpenSSL Heartbleed. Everyone will remember that one from a few years ago. And it took me several months and several millions of dollars just to remediate that with my own technologies. But all the vendors had it embedded in routers, switches, and firewalls as well. So you have to wait for all the vendors to do it. So it's a pretty big blast radius when something like that occurs. So I think, the industry, we're now at a much larger scale than that was just eight or 9 years ago. So we're at a much larger scale now of available open source. And we all want the innovation. We all want that technology. But, if everybody has to go create what I created at a major financial institution at some great expense, right, we're just not going to scale to that problem. So I really think it's up to the community together, to bring together a secure open source repo. And we can all pay our little fair share to access it, but that we know that all the code that's in there has a provenance that we can trace back to named individuals, right? We can put a risk rating on every single code contribution if we need to. And we have all the power of all the best tools in the industry to run against that, right? And so I think what I'm pushing and what I'd like to see is a shared common set of repos, global level. Maybe they're regionally, sort of attested to. And then, when you get that code, you should be able to run it on an Intel platform or AMD platform, an ARM platform, or whatever. and have a trusted computing foundation. And Intel wants to be a leader. We will be a leader in this space with our technology, and I will put my money where my mouth is to enable this to happen in the open source community.
Well, you hit on a couple things there that I found interesting. I think first is it really is going to rely upon big technology companies to make the investments to ensure we have that scalability and extensibility. But another interesting thing I'm seeing is that kind of first generation of cybersecurity and technology, folks that hit it big are starting to plow through philanthropy efforts back into the community. I think about Craig Newmark and Ron Gula, a lot of folks that have done well and really have a sense of community. And so I expect to see a lot more of that. And I think that's really kind of the path forward. You mentioned another thing in there at the very beginning was about briefing boards on what are some of the key metrics and assurances. I think that's probably, Greg, maybe a separate panel conversation that we should have. Kevin Mandia talks about this, and it cracks me up. But he says, when he goes in front of boards and you throw green Harvey balls up there, and the board doesn't believe you. You throw yellow, they get frustrated, and then when you throw all red up, they lose hope. So we've got to come to, I think, some sort of better approach to translating and discussing risk at the executive level. So again, let's maybe do that panel next year in Munich. All right, so let's close this one out. We got a third. Let's move on to chips. Really, I think the strong suit of Intel right now. So one of the many takeaways that I had from COVID was the supply chain stresses and the incredible demand for chips, semiconductors, and the technology that was helping us get through this event. I mean, you still look out today, it's hard to get some of the things like a PlayStation 5, automobiles in particular, new vehicles at least running off the line, even boats. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing out there in the world about how we're boosting supply? Because it's not just about diversity, it's about boosting that supply. And I've seen that the European Union's making big plans to address the chip shortage. The U.S. has made some legislative bets, and I think there's probably room for additional funding. So tell us, with all this in mind, how does a resilient supply chain for chips enhance national and regional defense, including in the EU, for defense and security goals?
Yeah, I'm not a semiconductor supply chain expert. I'm a software guy who's built a career and made a good living off of all the semiconductor technology that's been developed since I started with the 8085 and like when I was in high school. And so here we are today, where the whole world is just super highly dependent on semiconductor technology and all the software we were just talking about. And so as the CTO of Intel now, I sort of look at this and say, okay, I'm addressing the software part, so I'll address the trust, part on the computing side. But, the fundamental problem is just the demand is accelerating, right? So that fundamentally it's in a demand problem. And then we have, dependency all the way back to the rare earth metals, right? That we have to mine out of the ground to produce these semiconductor technologies and create the wafers and do all the processing. So it's a complex ecosystem, right? Companies like ASML in Europe, which we're partners and we do joint research with. And, I think the whole industry is dependent on a small number of suppliers for this advanced technology. And we need diversity in that, in the manufacturing, which the U.S. has now done with the $20 billion investment in the state of Ohio, including money for academic research and partnerships with academia and incentivize innovation. And then, we're obviously pro-European, following suit with European Chips Act, if I could call it that. And so, and we've already got research partnerships, investments in high performance computing with academic institutions. We've got a quantum computing effort going on in Intel Labs, partnered with European University. So I think, our strategy is Europe has a huge demand, particularly with the auto industry and the manufacturing industry that's very strong. And so I think we need diversity, global diversity of that supply chain, but global diversity of the manufacturing capacity, right, to give some level the playing field and provide more choice for the industry and for the world.
Yeah, I had a saying when I was at CISA, defend today, secure tomorrow. If we're not thinking about how to address tomorrow's challenges, then we're we're going to be blocking and tackling on today's issues for the rest of our lives. So it's great to hear about what Intel is doing looking forward and how to address some of those challenges. So, Greg, we're at time. I really appreciate chatting with you today. Thanks for your insight on some of those key pressing issues for today. And I think the broader Munich Cybersecurity Conference is going to benefit from this conversation.
Well, thanks, and I'll quote my boss Pat Gelsinger, who says, semiconductors are the oil of the 21st century, and we have to think of it that way.
Great, thanks, Greg.
Thank you.